My name is Captain Erica Jones. I recorded this message with my co-pilot, Arthur C. Smith, for future ISU SSP participants to share our cautionary tale. Humanity needs innovative and disruptive technology, but that tech also needs to be safe, reliable, and inclusive if we want it to be widely adopted and sustainable. Back in 2036, we hadn't worked out all the issues, like environmental impacts, air and space traffic management, nor did we have the transnational regulation.
On July 20, 2036, Captain John and I were set to pilot our 10th orbital flight. Together, this time from Sydney to London. What was supposed to be a 95-minute trip, inclusive of takeoff and landing, ended up as one of the longest days of my life.
Many of you are using the latest iteration of the digital suborbital passport. This was mine, version 15.2. We were still beta testing the concept in the 20s and the 30s, reconciling user privacy issues and data to drive design innovation. And as you can see, my medical data, radiation exposure, and flight history was recorded and tracked. With everyday humans traveling to space, the widespread use of human performance data was considered controversial.
On that fateful day, as we approached the spaceport entrance, I was greeted by a demonstrator protesting against pollution and noise caused by the suborbital flight. They also felt the high-priced ticket exclude a majority of population. As companies tried to commercialize suborbital travel, we saw a trend in wealthy states building spaceports. Many felt marginalized.
As we continued to the gate, I couldn't help think about the protesters, because I understood their perspective. They didn't see the benefits of suborbital travel outweighing the perceived risks and negatives. Our industry certainly could have been much more engaging with stakeholders to get their buy-in. We could have generated a unified plan to lower prices and prevent rocket emissions. Commercial suborbital liners could become as routine as commercial airlines. We just weren't there yet. And yet, when I reached the gate, I got a dose of the protesters' reality. I saw my passengers fresh out of their pre-flight training. And I had confidence in the crew and the medical team who conducted that training. The passengers were not anxious in the least. In fact, quite the contrary. They demanded some champagne, and they were, negotiating with the ground crew over their luggage. I silently nodded my solidarity to the crew as they reasoned with the passengers about mask constraints for such flights. After inspecting the thermal protection outside of the vehicle, Arthur and I were ready to go through the flight check paperwork. We started to go through the checklist and we tried to tune out the surrounding commotion. But the passengers just kept escalating their complaints. Everything from how the flight suits were heavy because of the equipment, like the dosimeter, or they were baggy and not designer enough. Despite all that training, they didn't understand that the main purpose of the suit is to ensure that their flight would be as comfortable as possible. Arthur and I go way back, like our last 10 flights. He's always calm under pressure, but today I could tell he was affected by the scene.
I remember thinking, they have bespoke suit? Do we need to remind them about how just a few years ago we had only one size for male and one size for female? I felt very bad for our crew. Everything they said just was not good enough for the passengers.
We entered the cockpit for final inspections before takeoff. We closed out the roll call with the flight ops team, including checks to ensure that the life support systems like air composition and pressurization is optimal. They reported that all systems are a go. You see, by the late 2030s, suborbital liners made structural, thermal, and even material engineering advancements. And our vehicle was designed for reusability. It had already undergone 6 flights, and this one was lucky number 7. I had every faith in the vehicle because of that. Maintainability, inspectability, that was all a part of the design. Much of the flight would be autonomous. With everything looking nominal, soon we'd be ready for takeoff.
Right. I plug in the trajectory flight path. We will rely on our highly adaptable navigation and control system that directly interact with the other suborbital vehicle and sometimes worse with the space debris nearby. At that time, the flight basically started with a propulsion phase with a workout type of engine, followed with a suborbital flight over the Earth in microgravity condition, and finally a gliding re-entry to the spaceport. Air Traffic Control Center on the ground will monitor our flight and ensure that we have clearance for landing.
22 minutes into the flight, our navigation system alarms startled us. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. We were veering completely out of the trajectory flight path, and the risk of colliding with space debris increased with every second. And this debris could have been an obsolete satellite remnant from several decades ago, as identified by the Space Traffic Control Center. As designed, our navigation system automatically diverted the vehicle's trajectory, and I knew that our 10 passengers were going to panic if they realized what was going on. But of course, their in-flight infotainment screens had been moved to accommodate for their luggage lockers.
Right. If the passengers panicked, our 2 crew members on board would have revolt on their hand. Ray, one of our flight crew, notified us that some of the passengers experiencing motion sickness were getting worse, while others were getting agitated because of the vibration in general.
Vibrations and motion sickness are not uncommon on suborbital flights, but the trajectory change probably made it worse. I made a mental note of the flight manifest and started thinking through the passengers' digital suborbital passports and double-checked the biosensors. Were any of our travelers, were they prone to SMS-based motion sickness? Were any of them experiencing gastrointestinal discomfort, or did they have heart issues? And what if they had a history of psychomotor agitation that could endanger a fellow passenger? I had to disable the systems and pilot the vehicle. I notified the authorities at the ATC and STC that we would have to make an emergency landing so that they could be ready with the crews. Best case, I could divert us to the Saharan spaceport, or less ideal, someplace in the desert to minimize civilian casualties.
Finally, the ATC cleared us for a safe landing away from other air and spacecraft to make an emergency landing at the spaceport just outside of Lyon. However, we couldn't make it and land closer to Dakhla, the westernmost part of the Sahara Desert. During the emergency landing, the Space Rescue Coordination Center tracked our final destination because satellite relayed our distress call. Depending on how and where we land, we couldn't rely on the local emergency support. We knew that the rescue team would get to us soon.
We survived. All 10 passengers, 2 crew, Arthur, and me. We landed safely. The rescue team was dispatched, and the ground ops team could deal with the vehicle. But unfortunately, the fallout for our liner was just beginning, because our VIP passengers were not happy with the desert tour. You know, back in the 1920s, there was a very popular show called Black Mirror, portrayed near-future dystopias as commentary on social issues and the use of technology. Now, I hadn't thought of that show in decades, but surrounded by the irony of the desert, looking up to the sky from which we had descended, and as the crew tried to appease and reason with our disoriented and vexed passengers, for one brief moment I experienced deja vu, and I wondered if we were in a Black Mirror episode. As I said at the beginning, I hope this serves as a cautionary tale for you. As you know, suborbital travel became more widely adopted and routine, but even in 2036, we still had a ways to go. As you complete your SSP studies and develop orbital and deep space travel, I hope you are deliberate and conscientious about the benefits as well as the risks.